All right. Good day, everyone. This is CJ with Rogue Money, and we are delivering an absolutely very special Rogue Money radio. Today's guest does not need any introduction. However, in saying that, today we are joined by Jim Willie, who is the editor of the Hat Trick Letter that you can find on goldenjackass.com. I'm just super stoked to have Jim on today. As many of our listeners and fans know, V has been traveling and V is sick, so unfortunately he cannot be on today with us. However, in saying that, Jim, welcome to Rogue Money Radio.
Oh, it's good to be back. It's been a little while, and a lot of developments. I always like to mention that since the last time there've been a lot of developments, and you just can't get away from that. Nothing stands still in this systemic breakdown and departure of the dollar as the global reserve currency, based in the structure of the petrodollar. Nothing stands still. I think we're getting into a pretty high gear now for the paradigm shift, the global paradigm shift. And for those who aren't familiar with the term, paradigm shift means the whole model is changing. The dollar doesn't rule the roost anymore. The United States does not rule the waves anymore. The U.S. economy is not the primary economic engine anymore. The paradigm shift, everything is changing. The global model is changing. It's exciting, but very disrupting, CJ.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last several years, everything that has transpired, witnessing a huge shift. And as of lately, as of the most recent information, it sounds like the petrodollar is set to be replaced as the petro yuan futures potentially may launch this year.
They're talking about it for a Shanghai launch. And this, I believe, I try not to deal too much with the superlatives. I'll say, well, this is very important. But I'm going to call this RMB oil contract the most important financial event since Lehman and the failure there, the kill of Lehman. But in terms of structural changes, it's the biggest financial event in over a generation. That's how important this RMB oil contract is. The meaning of it is that China can now approach the Saudis and say, we're going to line up a bunch of future big purchases of your Saudi oil, and we're going to price them in RMB, the Chinese yuan. We're going to set up the price for, say, March delivery or June delivery. We're going to set it all up and hedge the risk for the major businesses like refineries and chemical companies or whatever. And we're going to use the RMB. We're not going to use the dollar standard anymore. We're not going to be using treasury bills to pay for the shipment of oil in tankers. We're going to be using RMB. And we're going to set this up with the hedging and the future contract, all the different details contractually, with the RMB using the oil futures contract in Shanghai. This is enormous. It undermines the petrodollar. And look to see, you're starting already to see the parade. Right before I posted the gold hat trick letter, the gold report for the hat trick letter 2 days ago, there was a news item. The same day, Pakistan decides to conduct their trade with China all in yuan, RMB. So Pakistan bilateral trade with China is no longer the dollar. And the Pakistanis were informed or, coerced or, coaxed that you're our neighbors, Pakistan, says China. You're going to be part of the Eurasian trade zone, so fall in line. And now India is starting to act up a bit, and I expect them to be not avid participants, but passive participants in the Eurasian trade zone. This Eurasian trade zone is far more than Russia and the former Soviet republics. China has made a decision not to be a formal member of the they call it the Eurasian Economic Union, but I get tired of the EUs. There are too many EUs out there. So I call it the Eurasian Trade Zone. China made a decision not to be an integral part of it, but they're going to be tied through 100 cables with the Eurasian Trade Zone. They're tied with Russia, for instance, with the Holy Grail energy deal, a 10-year deal worth $250 billion for pipelines and oil and gas delivery and LNG facilities with Russia. But how could China not be a member of the Eurasian Trade Zone when they got the Holy Grail energy deal with Russia? Of course they're part of the Eurasian Trade Zone. So you're going to get one nation after another, and the most recent has been Iran. Iran is defiant. They've been defiant since 1980. I don't want to get into the politics of religion and Islam and all that, and Islamic Republic of Iran. I don't care about all that. It's essentially the rise of the Persian Empire, and they're defiant toward the United States. There is some irony. Ayatollah Khomeini spent years of exile in France. Okay, well, what's that all about? Iran has chosen for the last several years not to trade in dollars. They sell a lot of oil and gas to China, and they do not take dollars. For years, they've been setting up like an account with the Chinese. We'll deliver a whole stack of energy to you, and we'll have credit for, say, motorcycles and pharmaceuticals and television sets and whatever from China to Iran. That's called barter. But now Iran has joined the Eurasian Trade Zone, and they're more formally setting up import-export bank facilities and basically the non-dollar financial structures. So the Petro Yuan from this RMB oil contract out of China is the giant superhighway on which Eastern nations will ride for their economies. It just could not be bigger. Watch next how China is going to approach the Saudis and offer them a big pile of money, investment in Aramco, so that China can sit on the board with a member or two and release the permission for payment of Saudi oil by China in RMB currency. And I think the result is going to be that some of the Saudi leaders are going to get killed by the U.S. dark forces. They've been threatened right now. One of the most interesting questions coming out of Saudi Arabia in the last couple of months regarding the attempted assassination of Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Las Vegas. Yep. So that was a big incident with a lot of kills of the U.S. public at a concert, but behind the scenes it was a assassination attempt of the Crown Prince of Saudi. I think, I'm not 100% sure, but it looks very, very much like Prince Al-Walid was behind it. And now he's going to be lucky to get out of prison with much of his money left or having his life preserved. But one of the most interesting questions coming out of Saudi these days, CJ, is how much money did the arrest of all the royals and big business members and lazy element of the royals, how much money did that result in? Because word is out that the arrested, they're not so much criminals as they were dead weight to the Saudi financial structure and involved in the narco element with the Bush family. Mm-hmm. How much money promised will be coming to the Saudi financial treasury? I'm hearing, and the word is out, that many of the royals were told, hand over 60% or 40% of your wealth, depending on how badly you are abusing the system, and you can go free. So it's like buy your way out of jail. What were the charges? I didn't catch that. What crime was involved except opposing you? I didn't catch that. Very few political scientists take a very close look at Saudi Arabia. It's a fascist state operating as a monarchy. So going to be very interesting to see how this plays out with Saudi, how much money they gathered from the arrests. And get this. This is a real twist. It's not exactly a Petro Yuan concept, but let's suppose there were 6 or 8 royals and they had like 30 or 40 billion dollars that they promised to hand over to Crown Prince Salman, except the money's not in Saudi Arabia. And remember, Salman arrested Prince Bandar. He's the narco connection with the United States government, the narcotics element. And that gets funneled into ISIS. ISIS funding for purchasing weapons and paying for the guerrillas in Syria and Iraq. Okay, so Salman pissed off the narco guys. So the narco guys own the central banks. If money is kept in Europe and 30 to 40 billion is promised by arrested royals to the Saudi treasury, it's possible and very likely that the banker cabal that has their side project of narcotics trafficking will block the return of money to Saudi Arabia for the benefit of Prince Salman. It's looking very clear like Prince Salman is siding with the white hats of the Pentagon. And in doing so, he's on the opposite side of the narcos. Bush, Clinton, central bankers, Wall Street. This is getting very dicey. I'm expecting attempts on Salman's life. I don't get a lot of agreement on that. Only 1 or 2 of the jackass 8 or 10 colleagues is in agreement with me. They think, oh no, Salman, he bought some time, he's got protection. Well, I don't think he bought a lot of time because I don't think he's going to get a lot of money, and I don't think he's got a lot of protection because he has a lot of rival prince enemies. Not prince, royal enemies. Consider that the entire King Fahd family hates Salman. The entire King Abdullah family hates Salman. The entire Nayef family hates Salman because Mohammed bin Nayef was the crown prince before it was just snatched out of his hands. And furthermore, Prince Bandar's family hates the crown prince. So those are 4 powerful families that hate the prince. Okay, is it just going to be, well, we don't like you, we're going to just sit on our hands and let all this develop? No, they don't operate that way. Not in their society. They're much more likely to operate in a way where they try to undermine the crown prince. So I don't think we're going to get tranquility in the next chapter in Saudi land. I think we're going to get retribution and blowback. And furthermore, if they really pissed off, if the Saudis and the arrests and all that with Salman, Prince Salman, if they really pissed off the narco element, will they not get Langley terrorism and explosions as a result and assassinations? I'm just expecting a lot of mayhem in Saudi in the next few months. I'm not joined by many people on that, but that never stops me from taking a position based on logic and evidence.
Right. Now, in terms of the confiscated money, how much time does that give the kingdom? And then also, as we head into 2018, I know you mentioned the Aramco deal. Is that IPO actually going to happen, or will that be the majority China influence come in with the huge price tag on that?
Regarding Aramco, I just don't see how New York can get that listing. Not when the lawsuits against Saudi, which is an absolute travesty. The patsies were the 10 young kids who were Saudi pilots. Now they had trouble flying a Cessna, but apparently they hijacked a Boeing. Right, a funny little fact, CJ. After 2001 and the 9/11 events, the airline industry decided to make an experiment for their experienced pilots. You know, they've got the simulator for pilots. That's how they do a lot of training. Well, they decided to conduct a test with dozens and dozens of professional commercial pilots to try to fly and crash into the World Trade Center building without any avionics. Do you want to take a guess of what percentage succeeded of professional commercial pilots in crashing into the World Trade Center without avionics in their simulator? What percentage? Take a guess.
Less than 3%.
It was exactly 3%. So you heard this story. Okay. All right. The United States Congress several months ago passed a law saying that victims and their families can sue the Saudis for their involvement in 9/11. Well, can they sue the MI6 and the Pentagon and Langley too? No, just the Saudis. Okay, I get it. How about the nation of Israel? Could they sue them too? No, just the Saudis, just the patsies. And how were the patsies set up? Well, that was a contract with Prince Bandar, the narco prince, with the connection to the Bush family. Bush arranged that, paid him several $1 million, arranged for the patsy young pilots, and we got the fake story that most Americans latch onto like utter morons who don't pay much attention to chemistry, physics, anything logical, or, God, it's just so disappointing, intellectual level. So if the United States Congress is permitting lawsuits against Saudis, and the U.S. government with the banking industry have colluded to freeze Saudi assets in the United States financial system, namely the banks, then the Saudis are not going to say, well, you know, we love this. Let's just put our listing in New York because that's where we're being sued under false pretenses. I'm real curious about the lawsuits and what the legal procedures will be, called due process. Will they be able, the Saudis, will the Saudis be able to produce evidence that shows that Israel, England, and the United States and their security agencies were behind 9/11? Wow. Going to be very interesting. My guess is they're going to be very limited in the admissible evidence to stop the lawsuits. That's what I expect. So, then there's London. Well, London colluded with the Americans to steal Saudi gold located in the Swiss bullion banks. Pardon me. That was what UBS controversy was all about. Pardon me. Something stuck in my throat. So I think it was about 3 years ago, UBS was charged, 4 years ago, UBS was charged with, what was it, illegal tax dodging American citizen accounts. And the United States declared jurisdiction over the Swiss banking system, set up some criminal charges, had a settlement. The United States government took control of a lot of things in Switzerland, in particular UBS, to capture their bullion banks and to steal the Saudi gold. And, you know, if that wasn't enough, they came up with more phony, goofy charges against Credit Suisse, the other of the two giant Swiss banks. And their charge was violation of the Iran sanctions. So the United States again declared jurisdiction over the Swiss banking system, made settlement with the Credit Suisse folks, and took over their bullion banks and stole more Arab gold. And where did the Saudi gold that wasn't stolen, where did it escape to? Ironically, to Deutsche Bank in Germany. I tell you, you can't make this stuff up. So I don't think the British or the Americans are going to win the listing, I think it'll be an Aramco listing in Hong Kong. Now, you asked whether it be an IPO or a private deal. I think it's going to be a private deal. I'm not sure they're going to get that IPO stock listing. I think instead they're just going to get $100 or $200 billion invested by the Chinese in the form of dumped treasury bonds. They're going to dump the dollar, invest in the Saudi petrochemical business, win the right to buy Saudi oil, which is still 10 million barrels a day. I just don't think they have all their undepleted reserves. I think they've got very small reserves compared to what they boast. They say, like 26 billion barrels of oil. If they have a tenth of that, I'd be shocked. So I expect no listing in New York, no listing in England, maybe a listing with some kind of a real primitive IPO to get things going and to get investors. But, disclosure is a tricky part with an IPO. The brokerage houses are at risk if fraud was determined to be part of the initial public offering. If, for instance, the Saudis said, well, we have 26 billion barrels of oil in reserves, and it's determined that they only have 4, and it's determined 6 or 8 months later by investors who are doing investigation and hiring independent geologists or whatever, or leaking information from the Aramco databases, then the brokerage houses are liable. And I don't think brokerage houses are going to want that liability. So look for the Saudis to get a partner in China on a private investment deal. They have a name for it. It's not called an initial public offering. It's called, I don't know, something like a general offering. I can't think of the name, but it's not IPO. That's what I think is going to happen. China's going to get their leverage. They're eventually going to say, we're going to buy your Saudi oil, but it's RMB or nothing. Screw you if you don't like it. We'll make up the slack with other Arab nations and Russia and Iran. That's how important Iran is. They're like the swing player with a lot of excess production. At one time a year ago, CJ, Iran had 80 tankers of oil floating around. They never stopped production. They just rented or bought another tanker and filled it up. And they fill it up with something like 2 million barrels of oil. That's what a standard tanker is, on that order of magnitude. So Iran's going to pick up the slack. And that's one reason why the Saudis hate them so much. It's religion and sectarian differences. Yeah. But Iran is different from Saudi in that they have a lot of excess production they want to sell. And the Saudis are running out of excess. And they're low on money. How much money do I think they're going to raise? And how long will it last? I think you asked. I think they'll be lucky to raise half that $100 billion that's estimated from the arrests. And I don't think it's going to last them more than several months. So I think the pressure will be on in mid-year all over again. All over again for the Saudis. Right. And have they stopped the war? That's a very expensive war in Yemen. I don't think so. There's a lot of pressure. I think Iran is saying, look, we'll cooperate. We'll play nice in the sandbox. You stop your war. We won't try to take away your oil clients if you stop the war, because we don't want war in our region. I mean, Americans couldn't find Yemen with 5 minutes of struggle on the spinning globe.
You're right about that.
It's just south of Saudi Arabia, on the Arabian Sea, the coastline, and Yemen is important, folks, because it has untapped, unexploited, vast oil and gas reserves. These last 50 years, the Saudis have been pumping oil and producing gas. The last 50 years, Yemen's been asleep. They're a neighbor. They're on the Arabian Peninsula. They have the same geology. Saudis know it. One of the dirtiest stories out there is that the Western press is suppressing financial articles about Yemen's untapped oil and gas reserves because it produces a nice picture of motive for the war, which is loaded with war crimes, loaded with civilian kills. I came across a statistic, CJ, the other day that was just shocking. 25 million civilian deaths are on the hands of the U.S. military since the Korean War.
Wow.
3 million in Iraq, a couple more million in Syria. But it's okay, they're not really human. That's the argument. It's okay. Muslims, Asians, Latinos, it doesn't matter. They're not really human. That's the line spun by the military circles. It's a hideous defense, very hideous, and very consistent with the fascist theme of, like, not so much Aryan white supremacy as it is American fascist supremacy. I mean, if you're if you're of like, let's just say, Mexican descent, and you grew up in the United States and you join and you're part of Hillary's gang, that's fine. You're one of us. You're a fascist. But the non-fascists are subhuman. Oh boy.
Jim, 2017 was a monumental year for, geopolitical alliances, shifts that occurring. How much will that continue in the Middle East in regards to Russia and China influence?
Well, Russia and China have done something very significant in the last couple of years. They've stood up against the U.S. military and said, here's the line. And if you cross it, there are consequences. And of course, the United States crosses it, and there have been consequences. But the United States never expected to get wiped out in Syria. By the United States, I mean the U.S. military combined with its ISIS creation. ISIS is straight out of Langley. It's also a coordinated effort with the Israelis. It's also a coordinated effort to supply soldiers, the guerrillas, and funding from the Saudis. It's all part of the narco chain. The main funding for ISIS is narcotics. Langley, Saudi narcotics. The main soldier stream is both Saudi Arabia, extremist Muslims, but also Eastern European wild Muslims, the white Muslims, and like from Chechnya, from Romania, from, oh gosh, I'm not even sure the other countries. I don't want to make a big mistake, but Eastern Europe and Western Southern Asia, that whole area, they supply soldiers, guerrillas, to ISIS. Russia and China are stopping the U.S. dollar from continuing in its hegemony. Hegemony is a strong word. It means dominance, but with extreme abuse. An example of the hegemony is that Saddam sold oil in euros for over a year. And finally, the U.S. got tired of it, so they declared Saddam a rogue, a terrorist. But there was another little element to that. Iraq was purchasing on a limited basis some nuclear weapons and delivery systems, and Israel concluded that they were at risk. And the whole story about weapons of mass destruction with chemical weapons and all that, yeah, it was true. I mean, gosh, we went in. It's so funny, the flow of events. We went into Iraq, the U.S., with an invasion. I call it annexation because we basically took over their government under the claim that they had weapons of mass destruction. After we got in there, we stole their central bank gold and claimed that they had no weapons of mass destruction, when they did, and they were all with Bush USA markings. So we lied about the reason to go in. We lied about after going in. We lied about everything regarding the deal. Stole their central bank gold, and they even came up with just a hokey story about discovering in a cave a bunch of yellow painted wooden blocks. I mean, gosh, Americans fell for that too. We stole their central bank gold. We found the chemical weapons. I had a friend here who was going to do some marketing stuff for the Hat-Trick Letter. Turned out not to be a workable deal. But this guy told me, when I asked, where you been the last few years? This was 2009. He said, I asked, what kind of projects did you have the last few years? He said, well, actually, I got out of Iraq in 2005. He said, I was working for Halliburton. I said, what? And he said, yeah, I was working for Halliburton. We found 10 warehouses full of chemical weapons. All of them had USA markings on them. He said, we did find the weapons of mass destruction.
That's how they knew they were there.
We claimed not to find them, and they all had American markings on them. So it was better to lie that we never found them. I said, yeah, and they stole the central bank gold and came up with a hokey story about painted wooden blocks. And he said, yeah, wasn't that funny? I said, well, it's funny until you realize how much it's accepted as a story. Okay, so China has stopped the American line of power in the Middle East. China's making buddies with Iran. China is one of the biggest clients of Qatar for energy purchases. It's all RMB, and the irony is thick there because Qatar has a central command center for the U.S. military, and Qatar has a huge RMB business with the Chinese. Wow. How does Qatar survive that? Qatar is my living proof that we're about to see the beginning of the dual universe, CJ, where the dollar has its sphere and RMB has its sphere. It's West versus East, and they tolerate each other. If they didn't tolerate each other, Qatar would not be so stable. But it is. And I think it will continue to be and serve as an example of peaceful coexistence in this dual universe. The United States forces are going to say, we don't want to come up against superpower China, and besides, we get our clocks cleaned. We don't want to come up against the Russians militarily, and besides, we'd get our clocks cleaned. So let's have peaceful coexistence and poo-poo the RMB and say, well, it's not going to amount to anything anyway. It's got under 6% of global banking reserves in RMB terms. It's got something like under 4% of global trade payment settlement in RMB terms. So watch that grow. Why will it grow? Take a look at the Petro Yuan with the RMB oil contract. I didn't mention one of the key facts regarding this RMB oil contract that's coming out in potentially the next couple of weeks. It might be a delayed, but who knows? It completes a triangle. In August, the Chinese came up with an oil gold contract out of Shanghai, and it's just kind of stood there waiting for a connective event. This is a connective event. Now the Russians can sell oil to China using the RMB oil contract, take the RMB and convert it to gold in one-stop Shanghai shopping. That's significant. So the RMB oil contract completes the triangle of RMB oil and gold. What it does is it potentially sets up a gold standard for oil purchase if they do it in something like the gold trade note. I think the gold trade note is going to supplant the Treasury bill, not the bond, but the bill, like the 3-month Treasury bill, the 6-month Treasury bill. It's going to supplant that in global trade payments. And I believe the gold trade note is going to sit atop the RMB oil gold triangle of futures contracts. That's very big, very big,
Massive.
and not possible without this petro-yuan contract. This supplants, this pushes aside, this overshadows, this competes with the petrodollar. And the Saudis are running low on oil reserves, they're running low on credibility, and they're running low on money. The Saudi reserves are being depleted very rapidly, both cash and, sovereign bonds, FX reserves, and in oil. Take a look at Gawar. I remember one of my jackass colleagues. He doesn't enter the discussions much, but when he does, he gives a real pearl. Back in 2007, he exposed me to the Oil Drum website. And he said, Jim, take a look at he pointed to it, a little story in there about the Gawar water cut, which is a percentage of water that is produced. Of course, it has some oil, but what percentage of water is produced, that's called the water cut. And the water cut was over 90% for Gawar. That was the biggest oil producer, called the giant elephant, for many, many years, but not anymore. And now Gawar is producing a 99% water cut. They don't replace Gawar. What they do is they discover 5 or 6 small ones, oil fields, and they all contribute, but they don't match the Gawar oil production of the past. They're having depletion. Of course, they have new discoveries. I just had a very interesting thing happen to me, CJ. Not a client, a follower, a British fellow in Germany contacted me through the contact us window, anonymous email from a non-client who doesn't know my email address. Contact us is very valuable for that. I didn't expect that when I set it up. But he was a former petroleum engineer who worked for something like 10 years in the 1990s in Saudi Arabia. He called it the golden era. And he said to me, Jim, there's something you're not aware of. You need to know this, because when the oil runs very low and the oil revenues run very, very tight and small for Saudis, they can turn to their mineral wealth. It's significant. It's not just oil. I'm curious if that means like strategic metals in addition to iron and copper. Does it mean any gold? Does it mean rare earth metals? So it's a lot of mineral wealth that's not been tapped much. That's what I think China's going to try to get involved in. And I don't know if any of that is under the Aramco umbrella. Think of Aramco as not just an oil industry. It's got vast, what's the word? Ancillary type industries like petrochemicals. But does it also have mineral production, mineral mining production? I don't know. Do they own the mineral regions with metal deposits? I think very possibly, because it's a bit of a Saudi monopoly on their commodity wealth and exploitation, like the big refiners and petrochemical plants. They spew out a lot of gases into the air, the atmosphere. They're not just making oil, producing oil. They're doing a lot of things. Well, they might own the mineral rights. I don't know. This is going to be very interesting to see how it plays out.
Very interesting indeed. Let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk a little bit around 2018, the forecast. And Jim, in specific, what I'm interested about is that what happens in the U.S. that once the petro-yuan takes over and the petrodollar is dead?
I'm not sure what you mean with the question. Could you rephrase that?
Yeah. So in terms of industry, because I truly believe Americans are the majority are asleep at the wheel in terms of what is around the corner as we head into 2018 as the petro-yuan goes online. What happens to the U.S. domestic economy?
Well, what happened to the U.S. domestic economy will occur through the entire event and episode of the dollar losing its global reserve currency status. Okay, it's going to happen in two steps, in my opinion. The first step will be the accommodation of the RMB universe. It's a dual universe I described. The dollar's going to have the West still captured. The RMB is going to take more and more alignment by countries in Asia, the East, emerging market, BRICS, alliance nations, all that. So the first step will be that the dollar no longer has the global currency reserve monopoly, so to speak. Okay? And with the lost monopoly, there's going to be an effect. The effect for the U.S. economy will be those nations that don't want treasury bills as payment for a shipment of oil or a shipment of containers, like for retail chains, Walmart, Staples, Target, Sears even. Those nations that don't want treasury bills anymore are going to say, we want RMB payment, or we want the gold trade note. In other words, we want something besides the dollar, like Chinese currency or gold bullion. Woo! That's a very big, development. It's like dismissing the dollar on U.S. soil. You Americans cannot use your dollar anymore because there's nothing behind it. We don't want it anymore. And that difficult position, I think, is going to be taken by the Chinese and their allies. And the movement will grow. So the effect on the U.S. economy will be more difficulty in the import supply chain. After that begins to take root, you're going to start to see certain retail chains with empty shelves. I'm not saying completely empty. I mean, if they had 30 shelves that were full before, now only 20, 18, 24. 2/3 are filled, 1/3 empty. And that will affect the Walmart cash management system that's very tightly controlled against their inventory and sales. So you're going to get inventory supply chain disruptions. Then comes the real big kicker. The United States is going to be forced to launch its own new domestic currency so that it can be devalued and accepted more widely in the community of nations. Now, that is a very big statement. The effect of having an interruption, even in part, of the supply chain of the U.S. economy and the rejection of the Treasury bill will have an effect whereby banking systems in the East will be dumping their treasuries, U.S. treasuries of all kinds, primarily bonds, because they're longer term, higher interest, higher bond yield. The banking systems are going to shed their dollars. And the United States is going to read the writing on the wall, but their arrogance and hubris and megalomania is going to get in the way. So I'm expecting that the U.S. economy is going to suffer rather notable damage before they get around to launching a new dollar. And the new dollar will mean $2. $1 held internationally, another dollar held inside the United States. Think of dollars in bank accounts in Panama, Singapore, Hong Kong, London, and Switzerland. There are lots of dollar accounts in those 5 countries. But they're going to be a new dollar for the United States only. And it will have to respond to the wretched third world fundamentals of over $500 billion trade deficit annually and over a $1 trillion federal deficit annually. This is really where the rubber hits the road for the United States economy, the realization that the dollar privilege that's been abused for a generation is going away. The United States lacks industry, therefore it has a big trade deficit. It imports a lot. It imports too much. Remember back 20 years ago, maybe you don't remember too well, but some do. The big mantra was the United States is moving toward clean industries and a financial engineering economy. In other words, the United States is going to give up its industry and rely on asset bubbles and derivatives, all of which began exploding with Lehman in 2007 and 8. How'd that work out, Mr. Greenspan, with your offloaded risk and your sophisticated financial engineering devices? Not well at all. Notice that Greenspan got out of town right before the crash. Notice that Bernanke got out of town right before the Lehman crash.
Yep.
Now, Yellen is going to get out a little bit early, not a lot early, not as early as Greenspan did. Yellen's going to get out so that she can not be there when the next crash occurs. And I'm calling it the systemic Lehman event, because Lehman was sort of isolated in the United States and big Western European banks, because there were a lot of mortgage bonds and treasury bonds linked to them, and a lot of different Goldman Sachs type financial instruments floating in the Western European banking system. It's from U.S. export of bond fraud. I have a funny joke. What are the main exports from the United States? Bond fraud and diabetes.
Yep.
So the outlook for 2018, I think, is going to be really quite interesting and dicey. A lot of things are going to begin to erupt. I think Saudi's going to erupt again. I think there's going to be some significant event related to Iran, where Iran prevails and maybe wins a friend with Europe. And by doing so, Europe will be parting its dominant linkage with the United States. Not many Americans are noticing, but the British have been doing something rather significant in the last year to really anger the Obama administration. There was an event where the British signed on to become members of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the AIIB. Think of it as the IMF run by China. A separate entity like IMF, but run by the East, for Eastern benefit without the stranglehold of Western debt. Look for the financial arrangements and features and linkage for AIIB to be a whole lot more cooperative and mutually beneficial than the one-sided IMF deals, like in Greece, for instance, that resulted in raping and pillaging and gutting the entire country. That was an IMF project. I don't think AIIB will work that way at all. Okay, so the British signed up for AIIB. Obama was furious. Actually told them, you're not acting like an ally. And the British basically said, F you, we're trying to survive. It's the future. Wake up to the reality of the future. And Obama did not pay heed. He just kept on yakking like a moron. The British have done something else in just the last month. They had a trip to China, and they've arranged for financial linkage with respect to the financial, the stock markets, the bond markets, the insurance markets, and other financial entities. A tighter financial arrangement between Hong Kong, China, and the British London Center. And the British are trying to create a much, much bigger RMB hub center. Now, anytime you hear an RMB hub, it's got two big features. It's bond trading and it's currency exchange. So, for instance, the French could work with, say, a British subsidiary and work together and convert a lot of euros to RMB in order to pay for imports to France and England from China. And they do so in London at the RMB Hub Center. And the Italians might decide, well, let's float the next, say, $20 billion worth of debt for the Italian government. Let's float it in London and denominate it in RMB. It's called a panda bond, after the panda bear. And the British want that business. They want that bond issuance. They want the panda bond issuance. And there's plenty of debt in Europe that might want to go the panda bond route and put it in RMB terms and look for the Chinese to invest. Why would the Chinese want to do that? Well, they get more influence for the Italian economy, for instance, and they also get risk-free on the currency side. They don't have to worry about the euro RMB cross. They just have to be concerned about the viability of the Italian economy and their debt structure. So the British are really pissing off Washington right now, and it's looking like, you know, I put it in the gold report for December, just out a few days ago. I said, it looks like the British are abandoning the dollar. And they're trying to organize their future, you know, post-Brexit. It's getting very interesting and very dicey in numerous respects. I've had this theme now for about 3 years. The United States is working toward isolation. And I think the big enchilada for isolation is the exposures of the elite plan with respect to chemtrails, GMO foods, fracking and contamination of the water table, laced vaccines, and I could go on. The United States is behind most of it with the British.
Yeah, Jim, if there's anything else you want to discuss in regards to the EU, but if not, we can go ahead and jump into that conversation in regards to the war on humanity that's occurring with Big Pharma, you know, GMO and the vaccines.
Well, let me add a couple things with respect to EU. The two focal points, in my opinion, are Italy and Germany. Italy is almost breaking the rules for the Euro Central Bank. Almost. They're actually coming up with a fiscal currency to finance their debt and to make it kind of like a secondary type of Italian currency. I think it has the prospect of later evolving into the Italian lira in a comeback. Okay, Italian banking system is wrecked. They've got the greatest non-performing, it's like 320 billion euros worth of non-performing bonds, non-performing debt in their banking system. And it's just rotting their banking system altogether. They got bank runs, lots of different things going on. I learned something in the last year that if the Italians break out from the Euro monetary union, no longer use the Euro currency and go back to the lira in whatever avenue is chosen, it will wreck the entire euro, because the euro really has a dozen or so elements to it. And if you pull one out, you wreck the whole, think of it as a sweater. All the threads are intertwined. You pull the Italian cords out and the whole sweater falls apart. Okay, so that's very interesting. I'm looking for that. Germany is also interesting in two respects. They don't like the Russian sanctions. They responded in the last 3 years with some very clever moves to create Russian subsidiaries of the German companies so that the Russian output from the German company over there could be used to supply the German client. So, produce it in Russia, sell it in Russia, buy it in Russia, but all from a German company, or subsidiary. That was one reaction. But they don't like that rigmarole. They just want direct. So they're objecting to the sanctions. And then the United States decided to do something just unbelievably stupid and arrogant. They passed a bill to punish any financial German firm or construction German firm participating in the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Nord Stream 2 is for gas supply out of Gazprom, Russia, but they set this up years ago, and now they're working on completion. It's under the Baltic Sea, or is it the Bering Sea? I think it's the Baltic Sea. Sorry, Baltic Sea. I'm not really solid on my Northern Europe geography. I need to. Okay, the Bering Sea. That's Alaska. Okay, get it straight here. All right. So the United States threatened to slap sanctions on construction and finance firms in Germany, and Germany was absolutely furious because they set up the Nord Stream for additional significant doubled supply of gas to the German industrial sector. They had a little bit of an interruption from Ukraine. Can anybody remember? Oh boy. So the Americans executed with Israeli help the coup d'etat in Kiev, Ukraine, blamed it all on the Russians, cut off the gas supply to Europe, which affected Germany. Germany reacted by hastening the construction of Nord Stream 2, and the U.S. is trying to sanction Germany for that, and the Germans will not have it. We have a fight now. I hear the term silo mentality now when it comes to the German government. Think of 20 different silos in the German government, and they don't interact well. They're kind of independent. And some of the silos are very loyal to Washington, and some of the silos are very cooperative with Russia. That's where Germany is right now. And Angela Merkel just lost her coalition. She's really powerless now. It's almost a joke. So that's my little spiel on EU. And in just the last week, the idiots, the fascists in Brussels from the EU Commission decided slap sanctions on member nations within the EU, and I don't have the full story, but I can't think of anything stupider.
Right. And forming their own army.
Yeah, well, I think Europe needs its own army because it's been an occupied continent for 50 years.
Jim, I want to shift gears a little bit, and it's something on previous interviews that I hear you talk about, and that's specifically in regards to a recent article that came out that U.S. life expectancy drops for the second year in a row, and as it relates to GMOs, the vaccines, and to me, that's something as we head into the next year, something that we have to keep in mind is our health, our mental health, our well-being. But we're constantly under attack, Jim.
Yeah, well, you can point to GMO foods and vaccines all you want, and that's real. But I think there's something bigger going on, and I think it's related to obesity. The Rockefellers and their institute are the greatest negative influence in the 20th century for the United States, its economy, its health, and its social structure. The Rockefeller Institute. They put out a plan 30 years ago to aid the agricultural sector to work cooperatively toward corn syrup and to have it infused in many, many different places like drinks. It's so pervasive. When I was a kid, obesity was a small problem. We used to make fun of the fatties. Don't pick him on the baseball team. He can't make it his way around the four bases. Don't pick him on the little pickup football game because he couldn't go out for a pass to save his soul. But now it's so bad, the obesity, that 10 years ago, the high school programs stopped their phys ed because too many kids just couldn't do anything in phys ed. I think because, I don't know, eating is forbidden during exercise. I mean, I've seen fat folks running while they're eating potato chips. I mean, it's just out of line. So obesity results in diabetes. I had an accountant in the 80s in Boston, suburban Boston. I was in Metro West. And his name was George, Italian guy, nice fellow. He was overweight. He was probably about 280 pounds, something like that. He told me, I'm not quite 300, Jim. Give me a break. Okay, well, fine. You're pretty close to it, George. Yeah, I'm okay. Well, 2 years later, he wasn't okay. He had his feet amputated. Okay? And he died a couple of years after that. Okay, that's obesity and diabetes. It's not just a circulatory problem. It's a combination of that with the diabetes and the horrendous internal management of the blood sugar levels. Okay, well, add to that, forced vaccines and all the damaging elements that are being found now by analysis in vaccines. I'm referring to debilitating agents to turn down the immune system. And I'm talking about all the adjutants, like aluminum and formaldehyde and mercury. Why are they putting poisons in vaccines? Does anybody have even a simple explanation for that? Okay, so that's your point, and that's very real. But when 60% of the population is now obese, I think that's a bigger problem. That's affecting the health of Americans. Diabetes and related problems. But the Rockefeller Institute did that because they're half owners, 50% owners in Big Pharma, a fact not well known. There's another fact not well known. The Big Pharma pays for 1/3 of all medical school costs for students in the United States. So my joke is that if you've got an American Medical Association license, it's not a license to practice medicine. It's a license to be a sales agent for Big Pharma. I got a client in South Florida, a very smart guy. He had an inflammation problem with his hip and his knee, and his doctor prescribed the typical Big Pharma bullshit that attacks the liver because it's dangerously large molecules and all that. But it didn't do jack shit for his inflammation problems. So he went to a different doctor and he got a different load of Big Pharma junk, and it didn't work either. So he went to another doctor and then started doing private research and found turmeric, which in Latin America is called curcuma. Mm-hmm. But turmeric is an anti-inflammation drug that's widely used in Central America, widely used in Asia, and pretty much non-existent in North America, where Big Pharma rules. So he told his third doctor in South Florida about turmeric and how he was starting to have some positive effects from his inflammation problems after only using it for about 6 or 7 or 8 weeks. And his doctor said to him, yes, turmeric is very effective. And my client said to him, then why don't doctors recommend it? And he said, we're not permitted to. If I recommended turmeric to you, I could lose my license. What, American Medical Association license? Yeah, which I call a Big Pharma sales agent license. Doctors in the United States cannot prescribe anything besides Big Pharma drugs. And that's why you're seeing the 85 murders of the holistic doctors. And if you're wondering what holistic means, it's just that they didn't go to the U.S. medical schools. They learned about alternative medicine. They learned about Amazon cures. And these holistic doctors are being murdered because they're doing analysis of the contents of vaccines.
Bingo.
I had a shocking thing happen to me 2 years ago, CJ. I got a buddy in Panama. And when one of the it was a murder story where there were 5 in 1 week of the holistic doctors, because all 5 were about to be speakers, or 4 of the 5 speakers, at an alternative medicine conference where they were going to reveal the findings of their analysis of the vaccines. And this buddy of mine said, Jim, it's amazing. I've got a sister who works in South Florida, and she knows one of the dead doctors. Gunshot wound in the chest. They're calling them all suicides. Mm-hmm. And what do they all have in common? A visit by both the FDA and the FBI a few days before their disappearance and their murder. If you think that's isolated, you're wrong. I got other stories of an Atlanta holistic doctor having his entire library and office burned to the ground because he was curing cancer. I got another client who was from Southern California. And he wrote me and said, Jim, you're exactly right about cancer cures existing. I was once the IT officer at the John Wayne Cancer Institute. I went into one oncologist's office a couple of years ago. He said, I'm no longer working in California, but I went into his office for an oncologist, and I saw 13 pictures on the wall with W1, W2, W3, all the way up to W13. And it showed significant dark, ugly splotches on arms and legs. And by the 13th week, it was almost all gone. And the IT director said to the oncologist, what's that? Are those week 1 to week 13? What is the disease there? And he said, skin cancer. And he said, wait a minute, we've got cures to cancer? And the oncologist laughed and said, of course, but the cures are not available for the people because cures are not profitable. Treatment is. Treatment that never cures and treatment that never ends in like a revolving circle in an amusement park. You just keep on paying. And then he went on to say, do you realize that chemotherapy costs $70,000 in a year when the cure would be 1/10 of that cost?
Bingo.
Yeah. Well, one of the contents in vaccines is a debilitating agent to turn down the immune system. And I got something on the wall. I just found it quickly. They've been putting in a chemical agent called Nagalese, Nagalese. Nagalese turns down the immune system. On the other side, something called GCMAF is the cure to cancer. It turns on in a hyper manner the immune system. And if you think the immune system is not related to cancer, you're just dead wrong. There are plenty of cases on record of someone with a skin cancer case getting over an extreme viral infection and the skin cancer went away. Defensive cancer is related to the immune system. It's like, things went wrong and it didn't repair properly. In the same way, things went sick and it didn't get repaired correctly. Those murdered holistic doctors were going to reveal Nagalese being in the vaccines. What is it doing there? It's an immune suppressant. And the laboratory in Switzerland that was producing GCMAF was shut down after the murders, under pressure by U.S. Big Pharma, Swiss Big Pharma, and their governments. All right, so if you're talking about, the drop in the average life expectancy, yeah, vaccines have a part in it because it's reducing the immune system. And if you got a baby out there, you don't need 30 vaccines. And as you were pointing out earlier before we went on the air, they have new mid-age vaccination programs and new geriatric vaccination programs. They're designed to debilitate. In California, they had a huge forced vaccination, I think it was a year ago or several months ago. And they had a 10-fold rise in mumps and measles. Is that maybe from the vaccinations? But I point to obesity as the biggest American problem. I used to go down to Nags Head, North Carolina when I lived in Boston. I used to do it every summer for 23 consecutive years. Go down to Nags Head, Outer Banks of North Carolina, do camping, ride my bike like a maniac. I mean, like every other day, 30 miles. It's all flat. So the only issue there is, are you riding into the wind? And a funny element to that was, well, if you go out north on the bike trail, you're likely to encounter wind in your face. And if you have a long lunch, you're likely to encounter more wind in your face as it reverses on your trip back south to Nags Head. Anyway, I used to go there a lot, but I got very upset because, I'd climb the little tower. It's only 4 stories high. You get a good view. It's not a lighthouse, but it's a little tower in a mini strip mall. And I just look around and gosh, everybody's fat. They don't swim. They don't hit the beach. They go to Nags Head to eat. You got a couple of smorgasbords there. I went to a smorgasbord a couple times. Every summer when I went to Nags Head, I went to this one smorgasbord because it was wonderful. Half the people were just giant fat. And I made a joke as I checked out and paid. I said, "Do you charge double for the fat guys?" No. I said, "Well, you don't make any money on them."
Right.
And one time, I made the joke every year because I'm a feisty, obstreperous type. One time, a young guy at the checkout and the cash register said, "Yeah, but they're making money on you." Yeah, making money on me. The war on humanity is far deeper. The chemtrails are producing charged toxin that doesn't just enter your body's system. It enters it in a dangerous manner, being charged. I remember there was an incident in the late months of 2011 where 10,000 birds dropped dead over Michigan and Minnesota and Wisconsin. They had a dosing problem with their chemtrail. All you got to do is open your eyes and look at the evidence here and there and everywhere. It's all over the place. I have a client in New Mexico who wrote me a couple of years ago and said, "Jim, I have a little exercise every weekend. It's like dusting your table. You put a little, lemon wax dust remover junk on a little rag, and you wipe your tabletops and your countertops and your little section where you got ornate art devices or whatever." He said, "But I would do the same with my vegetable garden, clean off the tomato leaves because they had white powder on it." Some chemtrails. It's aluminum silicate. There's a big debate going on. In Spanish it's polemica. Debate and argument and controversy. That's it, controversy in California, because their rate of Parkinson's and Alzheimer's is up more than 5-fold. It's a result of the aluminum silicate from chemtrails. They're killing us. I mean, there's a little video in Costa Rica that's going around. And it's kind of funny, but it's not real accurate. They take a nacho chip and they light it on fire. And it burns. And they say, Están matándolos. They're killing us. But, you know, that's not really accurate because carbohydrate burns. Bread burns. Good bread burns. The point is, we're being poisoned by Halliburton fracking in the water table system. Halliburton had an incident 2 years ago where they accidentally dumped 1.3 million gallons of contaminated water into the water table. How do you do that? If it's that big a scale, it's a plan. But there are no charges, no EPA consequences, no nothing. Nothing at all. Every year there are 10,000 little water areas, you know, pools of water, little streams, that can be lit on fire. That's from fracking. Because we're poking holes in the Earth's table and we're wrecking the Earth's table. These are Satanist projects. Their motto is hell on earth. And they're making progress. A lot of progress. Take a look at the North Pacific. My gosh, there are rumors that Halliburton is dumping radioactive cesium-100 100 miles off the California coast and blaming all the damage on Fukushima. Well, by the time the Fukushima damage reaches California and the coast of Mexico and Chile, it's a bit diluted. Not as concentrated as the radioactive stuff hitting the California coast. I would not want to live in California these years. And then you have the California fires.
Yeah.
It's called direct energy weapon. Directed energy weapon. It's microwave and it's a laser weapon. And take a look. What's it? Santa Rosa, California? I think, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Yep.
Take a look at the hundreds of destroyed homes. Then take a look at the comparison of actual fire damage from other homes in other cities. And you see in the California damage, no remaining wooden beams, no remaining stone fireplaces, no remaining steel beams, no remaining metal anywhere. It's all ash. It's not a fire. It's a directed energy laser beam of a microwave nature, similar to what was used in the World Trade Center.
Wow.
They're doing experiments on the U.S. population now. They're testing out their weapons. You'd think they'd maybe use it on enemy lands, but they're doing it to ourselves.
Wow, just truly amazing, Jim. Very, very well said. Let's see here. So how about any closing thoughts, Jim, for our listeners? And then also, please share how our fans or listeners can learn more about your work at thegoldenjackass.com.
My suggestion for survival on the financial side is gold, silver, and not even diamonds. No, just gold and silver. Not even farmland. That's getting elevated in price. Gold and silver, and get rid at these high prices, these high values. They're all artificial. Get rid of your stocks and bonds. I would even trade in your high-valued Bitcoins and get gold and silver. And I'm not talking about GLD and SLV, the exchange-traded funds, which include no metal. Those are used to keep the prices down. They're elite devices full of corruption. Gold and silver, bars and coins. It used to be a smart thing to do, to sell high and to buy low. But now the majority of the U.S. population has turned really, really stupid. They buy what's high, expecting it to go higher, and they dump low, expecting it to go lower. And they've never heard of the smart system of investing. They got fleeced at 1999-2000. They got fleeced in 2007. And they're going to get fleeced again because all the internals for stocks and all the internals for bonds are turning negative. By internals, I mean, the number of 52-week highs and lows compared to S&P 500. Big disjoint there. Number of consecutive days without a 10% correction. It's just way warped. Bonds have their own internals. You're having the 10-year, 2-year Treasury yield spread. It's gotten way flatter than a year ago. These are recession signals. Okay, quick point on QE, the quantitative easing bond monetization program. First of all, it's very dangerous because it's not sterilized. By that I mean they're buying bonds without removing money from the system, which they used to do in past years. QE is unsterilized. It's straight out of the finance books and annals of Zimbabwe and South America. Hyper monetary inflation, unsterilized. Never a good outcome. Okay. If for 6 years QE has not stimulated the economy as they claimed, then the damage that we're going to see from the recession that they admit is a recession is going to be really a depression. They did not stimulate jack shit with QE. They prevented the U.S. big banks that were insolvent from going bust from a lost liquidity. QE is nothing more than emergency liquidity for dead banks. So if the emergency liquidity didn't produce economic stimulus, what will a recession look like after they doctor the data? Because in the last, I hate to say it, but in the last 10 years, we've had a recession of between 2 and 5% every year. Every year. If you want some proof, just do a Google of the Chapman, C-H-A-P-M-A-N, the Chapman CPI Index, where he looked at, 50 American cities and came up with a conclusion that price inflation over a 10-year period averaged between 7 and 12% for the 50 cities. Well, then how do we get 2% and 2.5% CPI? It's just a bunch of crap. Gimmicked economic statistics, all verified by John Williams and his shadow government statistics. So QE failed, and now we get the recession that they admit, which is really going to be a depression because we've been in a recession for 10 straight years. You got to protect yourself because I think they've got a big event coming when they do announce the new dollar, because the new dollar is going to come with a devaluation and might have a simultaneous bank bail-in event connected. And there might be something to criminalize Bitcoin at the same time. I don't know, but they're not going to confiscate gold and silver because they can't. They're not going to confiscate guns because they can't. They're going to try to do some limitations on cryptocurrencies. It's going to be interesting to watch. I would hunker down with gold and silver because actually I would really focus on silver. Gold and silver are both great, but gold's going to go up 5, 7, 8-fold. Silver's going to go up 8, 10, 20-fold. In no trouble at all. With none at all, silver's going to hit 200. No trouble at all. I asked The Voice one time, I said to him, ever since I started this newsletter in 2004, I get a lot of questions. What allocation would you suggest? Stocks, bonds, gold, silver. I say 0% stocks, 0% bonds, 80% silver, 20% gold. And I said, in several years, you'll understand why. Well, yeah, we did get the rise to 1900 for gold. We did get the rise into the 30s or higher in silver. But when the dollar loses its global reserve currency status, the new dollar is launched. The petro-yuan displaces the petrodollar. All bets are off and everything changes. The Voice said, I don't recommend 80% silver. I recommend 90% silver to my big clients, and they buy hundreds of millions of dollars worth. Okay, silver is going to be so valuable that it's going to have a private, secluded market, and the investors are going to be very well rewarded, but it might not be available in the form of, say, silver coins. It's going to be just too valuable because new energy systems are coming in. The Rockefellers did a very good job in preventing any new energy system or even any new carburetor system from being introduced. So the United States is now a generation behind China for trains and just the whole import supply chain supply system. Everything's going to change the next couple of years. And the new energy systems are coming. And the important point is that silver is at the core of all of them. Silver is special. It's not just for photography. It's not just for electronics. Those are like the old industries. All the new industries are going to be silver-centric. So go out and get your silver, and the U.S. government is violating the laws all the time whenever they suspend silver coin sales because they don't want to buy up the limited supply of silver because it would drive up the price. Instead, they say they're having production problems and reworking the calibration for the stamping presses and all this other bullshit. Anyway, that's my spiel. Thanks for having me on. I hope people go to www.goldenjackass.com. We have a lot of fun. There are 10 Jackass colleagues. We all pitch in. I do the writing, but a lot of contributions from my guys. I'm grateful to them all. I'm also grateful to about 10 real serious news hounds and about 20 other very helpful other news hounds in supplying me a lot of information. I do my own research, but I just take a look at what is sent to me and thrown at my doorstep, and it's amazing, the volume. It's from all over the world. I got a client feeds me stuff from Singapore, another from Taiwan, others from Australia, others from New Zealand, and Hong Kong. Gosh, I had a client once who said to me in an email, Jim, I've been a subscriber for 3 years. I got to tell you something that just happened. My son, and we both live in Hong Kong in a high-rise. My son just got a job that pays $200 a day, and he runs around holding a placard about the bad Japanese who are occupying the South China Islands. And I said to him, well, who's paying for that? He said, let me check. And he found out it was a Soros NGO, non-government organization. His son, in his 20s, being paid $200 a day to run around, yell and scream, and carry a placard regarding the South China Sea. This is the crap that goes on, but my point is I've got a real solid network of information and flow, and we also do some sharing of analysis. And right now, the big conversation pieces are around the breakup of the EU, Saudi, and the petro-yuan in Shanghai. So, goldenjackass.com. I just finished issue number 165. We're coming up soon on the 14th anniversary of the newsletter. It's a labor of love. Enjoy it immensely. It's also exhausting and frustrating, but, it is what it is. There are 2 monthly reports, CJ. One is called the Global Money War Report. It's about defense of the dollar hegemony, just the whole general attacks on the dollar to remove its global currency status. Okay, that's the Global Money War Report. The second is the Gold and Currency Report. Focuses on supply chain demand for gold, silver. I put the petrodollar in there because it's a commodity. Oil is kind of like a currency. It acts like a currency. Anyway, it backs the dollar in competition to gold, but gold is going to win. I have the Eurasian trade zone in the second report with gold and currency. So there are 2 reports each month. Sometimes they're a bit long, but they're all organized with chapter headings. The chapter heading for the gold report this time was the quick Fed rate hike notes, golden potpourri, deep state dregs in the light, like, Clinton murders, things like that. Sovereign bonds flatten as a warning. Eurasian trade zone targets the petrodollar. Gold to dismiss the king dollar. Economic distortions and crypto caution. That's just one of the 2 reports this month. So, people read them like a magazine. They check out 3 or 4 chapters that they are intensely interested in, and at times read the others, and that's fine. I never read cover-to-cover Business Week or Barron's, but I benefited immensely from reading them 25, 30 years ago, 20 years ago. Gosh, I'm getting up there. I just applied for Social Security, CJ.
Oh, did you?
I hit 65 last May, and the apes in the government are still processing my application. It's been about 7 weeks. I hope they're making progress. But get this. Every day, there are 10,000 new Americans who turn 65.
Wow.
3 million a year. It's a bit disproportionate because we're an aging population, not as bad as Japan, though. And I'm looking forward to that $2,000 a month. Yeah, please, let's bring that on, buddy. What are you waiting for? They're waiting. I think they're processing because they got so many, but they're also in no hurry. Was it the Obama administration that cut the Social Security Administration budget for overhead?
I think they did, yes. That is correct.
Okay, so maybe thanks, Obama, for slowing down my first check. But there's a little silver lining there. It's not much. Every month, I get closer to the full, they call it the full retirement age of 66. Every month, it goes up about, I think, $12 per month for the rest of my days. So I'm looking forward to that. Oh, interesting time, CJ. And, this is not going to continue on its merry path. The dollar is getting challenged by the East. The dollar is going to lose its coveted privilege status. It's being abused. And a lot of things are going to change. And it's going to cause a lot of pain, loss, grief, and suffering. You better be prepared. The best way is gold and silver, in particular silver. I have a little joke, CJ. Silver is going to be used to buy groceries, buy clothes, pay for schooling, things like that. Well, gold will be used to buy a car, buy a house, or buy a business.
Awesome. Very good. Jim Willie, thank you so much for joining us on Rogue Money Radio. For our fans, thank you for listening in. It was a pleasure. Jim, Merry Christmas to you. Happy holidays and all that kind of great stuff. So again, for our Rogue Money fans, Jim Willie, editor of the Hat Trick Letter, goldenjackass.com. Make sure to check that out. And this is CJ, and we're over and out. Take care, everyone.